Yes, sir. You can start now.
Saurabh, he's logging in. Saurabh,
No issues, sir. No issues.
he's just sitting by my side. इधर ही तो सब आ जाते हैं फिर बेटर रहेगा.
ठीक है सर. मैं तब तक एटलीस्ट इंट्रोड्यूस करता हूँ आज का जस्ट एक टॉक लोगों को.
हाँ ठीक है ना.
So good evening everyone. Welcome to the second lecture which we have planned today on acute pancreatitis management. So in first lecture on Monday we have listened to Dr. Rajesh Singhvi sir in detail about the acute management of pancreatitis, like first 2 weeks when the patient is with us on the day of admission to the first 2 weeks, how to manage the fluids and all those things. It was a very good and elaborative lecture. Along with its lecture, we had great inputs from Dr. Mukkewar sir and Subodh Gupta sir. So continuing with that, today we have we are going on to interventions in pancreatitis, and in this we are going to discuss about the medical interventions today, like endotherapy or endoscopic interventions in part 1. On Friday we'll learn about surgical interventions or endoscopic I guess there is a disturbance. Yeah. So next lecture will be on Friday, where we will be discussing our surgical aspects. And I wish all our medical colleagues who are there with us today will be there on Friday to see how we also do necrosectomy. And moderator Mukkewar sir will have to be there. So I request Mukkewar sir to just briefly introduce about the topic. And our speakers, Dr. Bhandarkar sir, Dr. Mukkewar, Saurabh Mukkewar, and Dr. Manoj Vyavhare are with us. Without wasting much time, I'll ask Mukkewar sir to just give brief introduction and then we'll start ahead. Mukkewar sir, yeah.
Yes. Good evening, friends. It has been a great experience moderating this pancreatic session, and the challenges in managing infected pancreatic necrosis are much, and there are a lot of innovations in this field. So let me introduce that you have two types of pancreatitis: interstitial pancreatitis followed by 4 weeks by acute fluid collection and subsequently beyond 4 weeks pseudocyst. Necrotizing pancreatitis, 4 weeks acute necrotic collection.
So we are losing your voice, I guess. Are you listening to it, Manoj sir?
No, I can't. Yes, sir.
Sir, we are losing your voice.
Yogesh, malai naik hote.
Yeah, Mukkewar sir, we are losing your voice. Some net connectivity.
No, I can't hear Dr. No.
Saurabh, just tell sir his voice is breaking up.
I was on. Maybe I'll join from other network.
Or
Maybe that's why.
Comments on the step-up approach. He probably is discussing a Panther trial, which is a landmark trial, a Dutch trial management of acute pancreatitis.
Sir, we are losing your voice in between.
For a problem why the voice is lost. Okay.
Yeah. So we lost you in between for a minute.
Can I start from the beginning?
Sir, no, sir. There is lot of disturbance, sir, on your voice. There is lot of disturbance on your voice.
You can go ahead with the lecture. Saurabh is joining from the port.
Yeah, sir. I'll start away with my lecture, sir. Yeah.
I think you go ahead with your lecture, Yogesh.
Yes,
you
sir.
can
yes,
go
sir.
ahead.
Yeah.
Okay.
So are you seeing my screen, everyone?
Yeah.
Yeah. So step-up approach in infected
Yes, yes.
pancreatic necrosis. Yeah. So this is a topic which I thought of speaking before going in for interventions, like what our medical colleagues do or what we as a surgeon will do. Why this approach has come up in practice of acute necrotizing pancreatitis. Why we need to understand that pigtail drainage can really cure or can give complete resolution of infected necrosis, why endoscopic drainage or debridement through endoscopic placement of SEMS or plastic stent can really give resolution to pancreatic necrosis, how it can give it, that has to be understood. That is my thought process behind presenting this. So the thing is, I'll just go ahead with my talk and tell you what exactly is the current literature on step-up approach. So when we look into evolution of necrosectomy earlier was before 1997, the concept was whenever the patient of acute necrotizing pancreatitis has fever, if you suspect that it's an infected necrosis or infected fluid collection, whatever may be the time duration of pancreatitis, you just open up and do necrosectomy. Before 1997, this was the concept. So early necrosectomy was the concept that time. In 1997, we had this study from Meyer in which early versus late necrosectomy was studied, and they showed that if you delay the necrosectomy by more than 4 to 6 weeks, let the necrosome settle up and form a mature cavity, the results are far better. The mortality is less. So we evolved from early to delayed necrosectomy in 19. Yes, sir.
Are
Any
your
issue,
slides
sir?
moving?
Yogesh, your
As
slides are not coming.
No, my slide is not moving. You are not seeing my slide?
There's
Yes,
one
We can see
particular
the
slide
slide,
is
but it's not moving.
No, we are only seeing the title.
Okay, sorry.
we're only at the title, is that right?
Yeah,
Now?
interventions in necropancreatitis. No.
I
Now?
can see
Now?
interventions.
No,
in
no.
Okay, wait. I'll just yeah. I'll just show. Now is okay?
Yeah, fine.
Yeah,
Now it's okay.
yeah. So I was
Yeah.
talking that we evolved from early to delayed necrosectomy in 1997 by that study, which showed that delaying the necrosectomy improves outcome. Then came the era in which Panther trial came up in 2010, and it showed that open necrosectomy should be avoided and you should go for less invasive, minimal invasive, like putting a percutaneous catheter, putting a drainage catheter, increasing the size of catheters, or go for endoscopic necrosectomy. And not endoscopic per se, but they proposed minimal invasive necrosectomy in 2010. And their concept was by doing minimal invasive necrosectomy, you can decrease the complications in form of organ failure, you can decrease the complication like incisional hernias, diabetes, and pancreatic fistulas. After that came this 2012 JAMA study in which endoscopic transgastric necrosectomy versus surgical necrosectomy was studied, and then came the endoscopic era of necrosectomy. So this is how necrosectomy has evolved from early to delayed, then open to minimal invasive, and then from minimal invasive to endoscopic. Now why this shift has happened? For that, just going to a basic of understanding the metabolic response to injury. Whenever we have any injury like pancreatitis, our body first goes in state of shock, that ebb phase for few hours, first like 24 to 48 hours. This is the phase in which the pancreatitis patient goes into state of SARS, he goes into phase of tachycardia and shock. Then our body resources come up and bring up the catabolism significantly higher level. And once the patient start into recovery phase, then the anabolism period starts. What happens in pancreatitis is this first catabolism goes up to first week and anabolism starts by nearly second or third week. And this is the phase when patient may land up with infection in second or third week, which again puts our patient under stress, which again puts our patient into state of catabolism. More the extent of injury, more will be the catabolic phase. So what we have to do when we are doing intervention is we have to decrease this catabolism. We have to take care of SARS. So it's a fight between SARS and compensated anti-inflammatory response. This management of SARS and CARS is very much important in getting good outcome of these our patients. So if you look at the graphical representation of SARS and its timeline, so this is the SARS which goes up as soon as the patient presents. By end of 2 weeks, it comes down. But if there is an infection, the SARS will go up again. So patient will go up in SIRS again. At this time, we'll start antibiotics and we'll think of any intervention. Now this intervention could be percutaneous, endoscopic, it could be laparoscopic, ward or open necrosectomy. Now choosing an intervention becomes very much important at this point, because more invasive the intervention will become, more will be the SIRS response. So at this point, if you choose a least invasive intervention, the SIRS response will be less. As I said, the SIRS will go up for infection. Then at intervention point, if we choose open necrosectomy, the SIRS will be high. If we choose open necrosectomy, the SIRS will be high. If we do percutaneous drainage or endoscopic drainage, we can blunt this SIRS response, thereby increasing or improving the outcomes of our patient. This is what was described in this PANTHER trial, in which 88 patients were randomized, and what they found out was, by doing least invasive techniques like percutaneous drainage or laparoscopic drainage, minimal invasive
Yogesh,
drainage.
your voice is getting broken.
Okay. So now is it okay, sir?
Yogesh,
Yeah.
your
Yogesh, okay. Your voice is okay with me.
Okay. Okay. So this PANTHER trial showed that when we use minimal invasive or this step-up approach, the new onset organ failure is less, multiple systemic complications are less, incisional hernia, new onset diabetes is less, and use of pancreatic enzymes after minimal invasive approach is less as compared to open approach. But mortality was nearly same in both the approaches. There was no significant difference in the mortality in minimal invasive versus open necrosectomy. Then came I said about this transgastric versus surgical necrosectomy. What they documented, one important thing was the interleukin-6 level after doing intervention versus through endoscope versus surgery. What they found, the interleukin-6 level are significantly less in endoscopic group as compared to surgery group. So if interleukin-6 is less, the systemic inflammatory response will be less. So overall outcome will be better. This is what they have documented in this study. The number of patients were far less, but then it was documented very well in this study that by using endoscopic approach, the overall systemic inflammatory response is less, so patient outcome is better. Again, what they found that major complications and pancreatic fistula in endoscopic group are significantly less as compared to the surgical necrosectomy group. But there was no significant difference in mortality here also. Then came this very much important trial in 2018. This was published in Lancet, in which nearly 50 patients, 98 patients were assigned, and 51 into the endoscopic group and 47 in the surgical group were studied. This is basically tension trial. Again, in this, what they found was surgical versus endoscopic, the most important difference is only the pancreatic fistula. In endoscopic group, patients don't develop pancreatic fistula naturally because they are being drained into stomach. And in surgical group with minimal invasive or open approach, whatever you do, the pancreatic fistula rate is very high. Again, here you can see the death was not significantly different in these two groups. One more important finding which these studies showed was nearly 50% of patients in surgical group in which only percutaneous drain was placed, they did not require any necrosectomy. So drain placement under ultrasound guidance or radiologic guidance worked in nearly 50% of patients in surgical group, and just placement of stent worked in nearly 45% in endoscopic group. This is also very much important, that you don't need necrosectomy always. If you just drain infected fluid, that might help in nearly 50% of the patients. So what does all these things conclude? These conclude that step-up approach is treatment of choice nowadays. Step-up approach by endoscopy or surgical technique by pigtail or minimal invasive can be decided based on expertise, because overall mortality and morbidity in both the things are same except for pancreatic fistula, which is less in endoscopic group. That is what endoscopic has advantage of reduced pancreatic fistulas. Rest all things are comparable in both endoscopic and surgical. You should decide whatever is best and expertise based on your expertise. The interventions could be endoscopic, radiological, and surgical. So interventions could be endoscopic transgastric like this. It could be endoscopic transpapillary. It could be retroperitoneal placement of drain or valve. It could be percutaneous transperitoneal transgastric placement of pigtail, or it could be percutaneous transperitoneal placement of pigtail in the lesser sac. and the purpose could be drainage, debridement, you can lavage, you can excise the infected or fragment the infected material. This is a VRP classification given by Dr. John Windsor, and it's very much important nowadays when you are doing least invasive techniques or minimal invasive technique. You should try to label which intervention you are doing. You should label what are the route you have used and the purpose which being done. Coming to this last review which has come up in 2019 by Portuguese people, that they have said that together we stand and divided we fall. So management of acute necrotizing pancreatitis should be done by endoscopic or percutaneous catheter drainage followed by endoscopic necrosectomy or minimal invasive necrosectomy. So the first and foremost thing should be drainage followed by necrosectomy if needed. And what they have said is you should have dedicated surgeons, gastroenterologist, intervention radiologist, and intensivist who can manage these things in the facilities. So a diagram or a algorithm which they have given is this. If you have infected pancreatic necrosis, look whether you have transgastric window. If transgastric window is available, endoscopic transluminal drainage should be a preferred one. If there is no improvement in 72 hours, and if there is a thick material inside that, then endoscopic transmural necrosectomy should be done. If it is predominantly fluid, then redrainage of that same cavity should be done. If there is improvement, just wait and watch. If there is no transgastric window, if it is a paracolic gutter or a predominantly retroperitoneal and there is a lot of difference, means it's not in opposition with stomach, then percutaneous drainage should be done. Then wait for 72 hours. If there is no improvement and it is a posteriorly placed necrosum, go for video assisted retroperitoneal debridement. If it is an anteriorly placed necrosum, go for percutaneous transperitoneal minimal invasive necrosectomy. If there is any complication anywhere like hemorrhage or anything, then embolization should be done. This is a very simple chart which we can follow in our clinical practice. So it's always we or me which can conquer AP. You should sit with your medical gastroenterologist, your radiologist and surgeons, look after the CT, look after the windows where you can place pigtails, look after the opposition of stomach, and then decide which way you are going to go in this patient for necrosectomy or drainage of the infected collection. Thank you. So that is my rationale of going ahead with step-up approach, which I wanted to tell everyone. Sir, please unmute your mic. Shrikant sir.
It was a wonderful presentation, Yogesh. You set the ball rolling by emphasizing the importance of step-up approach in the management, starting with minimal invasive, either percutaneous, endoscopy, and then going on for surgical intervention. So it was a wonderful presentation. Now we go on to the, I think, next talk. I will request Prashant to deliver a talk on endoscopic necrosectomy. Over to
Prashant,
you, Prashant.
Sir. Yeah. Prashant sir, please share your screen.
Is it coming on?
Yeah, yeah.
There is some audio disturbance today, actually.
Am I clear, Yogesh?
Yogesh, if
Do
you
hear
can
me?
check about the audio.
Sir, audio is clear.
Sir, I'll just ask all the attendees, please type in your section. Are you receiving audio clear or is it disturbed? Please comment on your audio section. This, yeah.
Yogesh, as far as, are you able to hear me clearly?
Yes,
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 sir.
yes.
Yeah.
Your audio is clear
Go
in
ahead.
most of the people. Most of the people are having audio which is clear, sir.
Should I
Okay,
continue then?
Yes, sir. Start, sir. Prashant,
Sure,
sir.
sure.
Please start.
Go ahead, Prashant.
Okay.
Prashant
Yeah,
does
yeah,
not
good
need any
evening.
introduction.
Good evening, Saurabh, Dr. Shrikant, Dr. Manoj, and Dr. Yogesh. It's a big honor to be a presenter in this excellent forum. And you really set the ball rolling, given the true rationale for the step-up approach that we have been discussing since Monday. So I'll try not to repeat the things. So these things are already known. The local complications of pancreatitis are acute peripancreatic fluid collections, which after 4 weeks, when it develops a capsule, it becomes a pancreatic pseudosis. There could be necrotic collections acute within the first 2-3 weeks, which if it develops capsule, encapsulated, you call it walled off necrosis, which can be sterile or infected. The walled off necrosis, WOPN or WON, usually contains both necrotic debris and fluid. So very 3 Ds which Dr. Rajesh told us nicely that day: delayed, drain and debride. So infected necrosis initially should be conservatively treated with antibiotics, then you drain, and then if that doesn't work, then you do necrosectomy. So my job is to talk of endoscopic necrosectomy. So we need a prior imaging, cross-sectional imaging, CT or MR, which will better define the fluid component, as well as it will differentiate between a cystic neoplasm. It will tell whether there is a pseudoaneurysm and so on. So contrast Lena study, especially if people like me who are not using endoscopic ultrasound, we do need to exclude pseudoaneurysm very reliably. And this is how the cross-sectional imaging looks. The left panel is the CT, the right is the MR. So in the MR, the white is the fluid, black is the necrosis. So as I told, the local complications will be pseudosis or walled off necrosis. How do you differentiate, and whether it is important to differentiate? It is important because we should know beforehand, as far as possible, how much is the necrosis we are dealing with. Then the approach might differ. So the diagnostic accuracy of MR is superior to CT scan for differentiating necrosis from simple fluid collections. But if you are doing endosono, you need not do MR, because endosono itself is going to tell you at the time of endoscopic treatment how much is the necrosis. So a cystic neoplasm also has to be reliably excluded. So presence of internal septations within the cyst cavity, echogenic mucin or a mass lesion. These are the characteristic of a cystic neoplasm. Sometimes you must, you must always do the fluid amylase within the cyst to differentiate. Mostly if amylase is high, you are dealing with the cirrhosis of pancreas. And of course, there is a precedent history of acute pancreatitis in these patients. Why my slide is suddenly...
Prashant, your voice is not heard. We're not getting your voice.
Sir, there is problem with internet connection, because everyone is listening to it loud and clear, sir. Probably some connectivity issue at your side, sir, because I got comments from everyone that they are listening loud and clear, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so most of the options, Yogesh, you already described. So the choice of technology depends on local expertise. But broadly speaking, collections abutting the stomach and duodenum should be addressed with an endoscopic approach. And of course, you always need a multidisciplinary approach. We have very clearly emphasized. And large collections that extend into the pelvis or paracolic gutters with our multiple collections may require a combination of approaches, such as both endoscopy and transmural and percutaneous drainage. How do you prepare the patient? Prior, you discontinue anticoagulants, antiplatelets, like the usual practice. Patient should be fasting, INR should be obtained, platelet count should be obtained. You put the patient on broad spectrum antibiotics like fluoroquinolones. You have to tell the patient that endoscopic treatment, though successful, is likely to be repetitive, because it is going to need repeated endoscopies for flushing, sometimes additional tract dilatations, change of stents, and necrosectomy. So this aspect has to be very clearly defined, otherwise there could be a frustration on the side of the patient. So the standard is today is whether you see a visible endoscopic visible bulge or don't see a bulge, you should use an endoscopic ultrasound, and it is the standard of care. So any mature collection which is abutting the stomach of or duodenum within 1 centimeter of the wall of duodenum or stomach is approached by endoscopic guided transmural drainage, and you should usually put, you always put stents, plastic, large caliber stent, plastic or metal stents. So what are the steps of endoscopic necrosectomy? So after the puncture is made, you see whether the fluid is clear or turbid. Then you dilate the tract. Then you can, at the same sitting, you can try to enter the dilated tract and enter the collection. You can do a direct necrosectomy. Then you should be putting stents, endoscopic plastic stents, lumen opposing stents, or fully covered stents. This is the schematic representation. So there is a collection behind the stomach. A puncture is made here. Then you put a guide wire. You see this guide wire on X-ray. Then you dilate this and put in stents. So this is the drainage now. Whether endoscopic necrosectomy will be required will be depending on the subsequent response. This is the early series in 2011 where they demonstrate that almost 90% of patients treated with endoscopic necrosectomy, they required 2 or 3 procedures, and complication were about 14%, including 5 perforations, 2 deaths, 1 due to massive bleeding and 1 due to hypotension. Most of these trials have been taken up by Yogesh, and I'm sure Saurabh is also going to tell a lot of studies. So I'll continue with the rest of the presentation. How long do you put the stents? If the initial fluid was clear and the patient has not required a necrosectomy debridement at the initial sitting, and if the patient is clinically improving, you keep the stents for 4 to 6 weeks till on ultrasound or CT scan there is complete resolution of the fluid collection and the stents are removed. But if you had done an initial necrosectomy, or if the patient is not improving clinically, or you thought that some necrotic material was still remaining at the time of initial necrosectomy, and the fluid collection is not resolving, then you should do repeated imaging and repetitive endoscopic procedures. What will be the cause of non-resolving collections? Use of single stent through small puncture site. So you're not adequately draining. Then if there's a lot of necrotic debris or the fluid collections are loculated, which may require more multi-gated approaches, as Saurabh will tell us what is a multi-gated approach, then which actually involves additional puncture sites. Then you will have to do flushing, or if you put a plastic stent to begin with, you may have to change it to metal stent, which is the wide bore stent. And other causes could be failure to treat underlying ductal obstruction or fistula, which will cause non-resolution of collections. After initial success, there could be a recurrence of collection, and the causes could be what is called as disconnected pancreatic tail syndrome, where duct disruption with viable upstream pancreas can be an important cause. Then undetected obstructing strictures, residual stones, or recurrent stones. So accurate visualization of pancreatic ductal anatomy remains critical for minimizing the occurrence of fluid collections. What are the complications of these endoscopic procedures? Infection, bleeding, perforation, and stent migration. The infection I dealt with, usually non-resolution of the collections, and you may need more puncture sites or changing from plastic to metal stent. Bleeding is usually managed endoscopically. Sometimes you may need to do angiography and embolization. Perforation is usually because if the opposition of the stomach of this collection to the gut wall is not very close, or if the you're not waited for the ideal 4 weeks duration and the capsule is not formed very well. Stent migration, the stent can migrate into the gut lumen, or it can migrate into the collection. Usually it can be treated endoscopically. So most complications are treated endoscopically. As Yogesh had pointed out, drainage is all that which may be required, and true necrosectomy, picking up and removing the necrotic material, may not be always required. As he said, 50% you may just get away with only a drainage procedure, which could be endoscopic, endosono-guided, or percutaneous, or whatever. So this study by Dr. Lakhtakia from AIG, they saw that 75% did very well only with endoscopic drainage, and only 9% required necrosectomy, which can be taken up in a stepwise manner, as told by Yogesh. So initially you do drainage only, If it doesn't work, then you add necrosectomy. So if this tension trial and Miser trial, Yogesh has very nicely already said, and why the endoscopic and or minimally invasive approaches are better is very nicely told with the help of the diagrams relating to SIRS and cytokines and so on. So I can skip them. Now coming to the crux of the matter, endoscopic ultrasound versus conventional drainage. I made a submission in the beginning that I am not using endoscopic ultrasound and I am doing directly without EUS, direct endoscopic puncture, which is the conventional approach. For conventional approach, you should see a clear visible bulge either in the stomach or in the duodenum. Then only you can make the initial puncture. While endoscopic ultrasound has a distinct advantage that even if there's no clear bulge, but you can see within 1 centimeter that there's a collection behind the stomach or the duodenum, you can safely make a puncture. Of course, if there is an intervening vessel, endoscopic ultrasound will guide you very clearly, because bleeding, if you enter into pseudoaneurysm or puncture a vessel, can be sometimes catastrophic. So but if a puncture has been made very cleanly, the technical success of endosono, and the success of endoscopic ultrasound guided versus conventional is same. But as I said, higher success, technical success is seen 94% in endosono versus 72% in conventional. And why this is because clear bulge, if it is not seen, then endosono has to be done. And then in this trial, particular trial, 8 patients had to be crossed over to EUS drainage because the conventional transmural drainage failed to visualize the bulge. Otherwise, no difference with relation to complications. And once a drainage has been successful with or without endosono, then the subsequent outcome is similar. Whether to use plastic versus metal stent, you would rightly guess that metal stent will be better, very rightly so, because they give you a wider diameter. But not that plastic stents cannot be used. Metal stents can be prohibitively expensive for the patients, and you can use plastic stent. Only thing is, plastic stent, the resolution of the collections may take longer. You may need more repetitive procedures. One disadvantage of metal stent, especially the Axios lumen opposing stent, is I'm sure Saurabh will tell us, is the early chance of bleeding, which has been described. So how to tackle that, how to overcome that, Saurabh will tell us for sure. So just few photographs and some videos I would like to tell. These are the instruments. This is a simple needle knife, hybrid say needle knife, which is used for needle knife symptotomy. Same thing which I use for initial puncture. This is a Cook cystotome, which has a metallic bore, which is you can bore with electric current through the cyst wall. These are the stents, the plastic stents, and this is a Nagi stent, which is a covered, fully covered metal stent, as opposed to lumen opposing stent, which because of the certain characteristic of the recoil material, the lumen are opposed to each other in lamps, which will be told by Saurabh. The Axios is the very classical example of lamps. Some of my patients, this is a endoscopic, the CT appearance of a very big collection here. 4 weeks had passed. Very nice for me to puncture. Take up, as you can see, a very big bulge here, easily punctured with the help of needle knife. You can then you pass a guide wire through that. You see the big loop of guide wire on the X-ray. So very easy to do this procedure endoscopically. You really don't need endosono. Then you dilate this tract with the help of a CRE balloon. You can see the dilatation being done. And after dilatation, you see a big opening. In the first sitting itself, you can enter into the cyst cavity and see if there is how much is the necrosis and so on. So in this patient, we did that. You can see the large amount of necrosis. Whatever necrosis you are easily able to take, you should take that with a basket or a snare or a net or forceps. But don't try to forcibly take out necrosis. That will lead to more complications like bleeding and so on. So this is how it goes. And then you put, initially we used to put multiple plastics, and you can see I put 3. Many times I would be putting nasocystic drainage catheter in order to flush these patients. Then you do, if the patient is improving very nicely, within next 2-3 days, you can do ultrasound, and if no toxicity is there, you can remove the nasocystic drain and discharge the patient. This is just, I'll try to show one, I'll leave this for time being and go to another video. You can see this video. Yeah, now you can see very clear bulge here. My needle knife has come out. You can see the needle faintly. I'm making a puncture there with the help of endocut, and easily a puncture is made. I can see I'm advancing a guide wire. Next thing I would be doing is do a balloon dilatation and then put multiple stents. See, the balloon dilatation part I'll show in another video, but you can see our post dilatation, very big opening has been created. The multiple guide wires are there, and you can put multiple stents. This is another video I'd like to play. After the puncture, most of the fluid drains out. So the guide wire maintains the access. Now I can dilate over the guide wire with the CRE balloon. Now you can see it's a very short video. So we can go to the next one. So this particular patient, I had let the video run. I'm putting a Nagi stent here. You can see the opening was already there. The Nagi stent being deployed. What had happened? I put initial plastic stents in this patient, and patient within 48 hours continued to worsen with fever and toxicity, and hence this was revised to a metal stent, Nagi stent. And this is how the inside of the cavity with necrosectomy looks like. I'm using a snare to catch the, it can be sometimes a bit bloody. I can catch the necrotic material, bring it out back and forth from the cyst cavity into the stomach. I have put a nasocystic drainage here. Whether to use hydrogen peroxide, initially there was a lot of recommendation to loosen up the necrotic material with hydrogen peroxide, but now it is given up. In my own experience, a couple of patients experience excruciating pain after instilling hydrogen peroxide, especially through the nasocystic drainage, which I had kept in order for flushing. So, and it can cause sometimes peritonitis. So that is almost given up now. So just to conclude, so infected necrosis or a sterile necrosis, which is symptomatic, you conserve first. So delay, then it has to be drained, followed by necrosectomy. So to differentiate between pseudocyst and necrotic, if it is a walled up necrosis, which is symptomatic, first is endoscopic drainage. If that is not successful, then you have to convert to ward, which Manoj is going to tell. So how to choose between endoscopic versus a percutaneous drainage? Little bit of guideline here. If it's a stable patient, endoscopic approach will be better. But infected, unstable patient, percutaneous approach may be better. Of course, finally, it's a team approach, and a joint decision has to be taken. What would be the best thing to do in your given patient? Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, sir is available on that.
Yes, actually, Prashant, it was a wonderful review of the entire thing, and you demonstrated nice videos removing the necrotic material. And I think there will be a lot of overlap between your talk and Saurabh's talk. So what we would do is we'll in fact take question answers and comments at the end of all the 3 lectures. I think then it would be better. Okay.
Thank you.
So
thank you,
now,
okay.
Now I would request Saurabh to present endosono guided debridement of the necrosis and draining of WOPN together with percutaneous drainage. Over to Saurabh.
Saurabh, I have made you presenter. Share your screen.
Yes. 1 second. Okay. Let me just log in here. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Live.
In your first slide, we are seeing you. You can go ahead. Start.
Okay, you can see me and you can see the slideshow as well, right?
Yes. Audio is also clear. Go ahead.
Good. Okay, hi, good afternoon. Good evening, everyone. I'm Saurabh Mukhevar. I'm a gastroenterologist at Midas. I work with Dr. Mukhevar sir and Yogesh. And I'll be talking about endoscopic transluminal drainage with EUS in combination with percutaneous drainage for a very interesting case that we managed recently. Had a fairly large WOPN, and we'll review some literature. I'll focus on the pertinent topic, and Yogesh has very nicely outlined the pathophysiology, and Dr. Bhandarkar has demonstrated his endoscopic skills quite nicely and how these patients can be managed. So this is a patient, 33-year-old male, who presented earlier this year in February with acute necrotizing pancreatitis secondary to alcohol. He had, the onset was 5 weeks prior to presentation, and then he came to Midas with abdominal pain, fever, had a weight loss of about 6 kgs. So labs were obtained, showed mild leukocytosis with the white count of 12,000. Procalcitonin was elevated. So we got a CT abdomen. So the CT abdomen shows, now you see here, this is just behind the stomach. The stomach's compressed in this large collection right here. And as you see, it extended further down. Okay. So it extended further down right here, going in the pelvis and left paracolic gutters. This large amount of necrosis. So this is all the way down in pelvis, basically. So we decided to approach initially with endosonography, and on EUS, you can visualize the collection quite closely from the gastric wall. We used Doppler to ensure there are no blood vessels along the way as we gain access to the collection. The standard approach, at least here in India with hot Axios, the cautery enhanced stent being expensive, is to use a needle. So we use a EUS 19 gauge needle to gain access into the collection, and I'll show you in a few seconds. The collection in this case was about, at least in the measurements, 11 by 8 centimeters, probably larger than that. And here you see the needle going across, and then eventually, I'll move forward. We got a metal stent placed. There are various stents available. The Nagi stent, as Dr. Bhandarkar said, we used here a plumber stent, which is basically a similar design stent, has flanges which hold the stent in place to prevent migration. In theory, these are better than regular covered stents for these patients, but really we don't have much head-to-head comparison data. But these are the most preferred stents now. In this case, as you see, after we place the stent, there is some necrotic debris that immediately came out, and then a lot of turbid purulent fluid, which is what came out. Sometimes, as you may see in this case, the patient developed high-grade fever subsequently, and this was over the next 48 hours. He had high-grade fevers. He was hemodynamically stable, never required ICU care, but then we decided to go ahead with necrosectomy given the persistent fevers despite antibiotics. Now you see, as we enter the cavity, it's a fairly large cavity, and right here we are almost reaching the pelvis here and into the paracolic gutters. There's a large amount of necrotic debris here, and right here at the entrance, it's almost occluding. And then we further move the endoscope in another cavity. Now there's some food. The patient, we typically allow them food, but in this case, I think he ate more solid food than he should have. So which is what's ended up in the cavity. And then further out on the other side, there was more necrosis, as you see. As we entered, the left side was the paracolic extension. On the right side, there was much more necrotic debris right there. So we decided to proceed with necrosectomy. In this case, we are using a Roth's net. You can use various tools and devices. Roth's sort of pretty standard. It's a net which is designed to remove polyps. In this case, we use it for removing all the necrotic debris. It's a tedious job and requires a fair amount of patience, especially when you're encountering a case like this where there's so much necrotic debris. And then then his fevers did not subside, but did reduce in terms of degree to 100 to 102 range. We continued. We placed a nasocystic drain at the end of the necrosectomy, drained it with saline, about half a liter. 150 to 200 ml of purulent necrotic material was coming out daily, but then, you know, he had persistent fevers, although a little reduced in severity. So next we proceeded just with another scan to check the progress as well. And as you see, the cavity is reduced a little bit in size from what it was before, as the liquid component has gone. But now we felt, as looking at this segment over here, there was a lot of extension in the paracolic gutters, and that was not being addressed with our transgastric metal stent. So therefore, we decided to get a pigtail catheter placed in the left paracolic gutter collection. Initially, there was about almost 700 cc of fluid, but this was obviously in combination with the nasocystic drain. And then, as you see, over time, the output from the pigtail gradually reduced to about 25 cc's in a course of a week. His fevers were persistent, and again, he was on the wards, not in the ICU, hemodynamically stable on broad-spectrum antibiotics. Made us worry clearly, as obviously the patient still had necrotic debris and possibly undrained areas. So now I got him down for another necrosectomy session. This is like a week after the previous one. Now you see it's looking a lot better. The left side is definitely much more clear. Now this right area, again, you see there's some pus here. And what I like to do is, in these cases where it's adherent to the wall, it's not wise to probe and probe the wall with sharp instruments. So I use right-tooth forceps. I really try to break it down, which is the goal is to basically let it move and let it flow freely, as you have created a fairly large opening for the necrotic debris to come. So all this, as you see, there's all this pus coming out. So basically, you know, there's infection. It's not coming out because of all this solid debris. So I just decided to break it down in smaller pieces, because it can be practically challenging to actually remove all of it very effectively. Anyways, moving forward, I got him another session for him. And this is the third session now. We go down, and again now in the paracolic gutters, now I identified this area. One area was drained with the pigtail, but the other area was still blocked. And as you see, there's necrotic debris and pus. So again, in a similar manner, basically, we just pulled out all the solid debris. And as you see, the pus flowing, which is quite gratifying to see. And as you feel like you're doing something productive as you're removing the solid debris, and the pus comes out nicely. And I got the scope in deeper. Now I probably am in his inguinal region now, I guess. And as you see here, I'm finally touching the wall at the end. So anyway, now moving forward, he had improvement. Fevers persisted, but a little lesser. He had a mild increase in white count. We got another CT scan just to see, as you see, the progress. Now we are doing much better in this case, with further reductions in the size in the paracolic gutters, some remaining necrotic collections here. So just move forward, and then finally I got to my last session of necrosectomy, where we went in. again, now you see there's a difference between the first time and now. Sorry for the poor quality, but now, you know, it's looking much better. You nicely, you see the walls nicely, the few recesses here. There's really little necrotic debris down here on the left, and there was one area on the right which was still remaining as we encountered. There was one segment which had still necrotic debris. So we went ahead and again, now this time we used some biliary baskets which were effective in this case. So really you have a combination of tools to choose from. So we went ahead, there's some mild oozing at the end. We placed a plastic stent at the end inside, and the idea was to just ensure that there's no migration as we try to manage them conservatively. Eventually, we were successful. After two to 3 weeks, his fever subsided. He was discharged, no abdominal pain. I kept him on NJ feeds. He was discharged on the 6th of March. 4 weeks later, was doing well, asymptomatic. And then after 8 weeks, we brought him back. The idea was to remove the stent this time if everything is cleared. And now, as you see, now it's basically all collections gone now. And there's nothing in the paracolic gutters. The cavities collapsed nicely. And so it was quite gratifying. The patient was very happy, he was gaining weight. And we went ahead and removed the stent. In this case, I kept the stent in for 8 weeks, largely for the size of the cavity. Usually it's 4 to 6 weeks is our standard. We don't like to do it beyond that as there's a risk of ulceration and bleeding. We'll get to the data in a few minutes. Anyway, we got the stent out. We get inside through the hole inside the cavity. And as you see here, there's mild oozing, but largely the cavities is clean, without necrotic debris, and we just removed the stent, and that was it. Again, he came just, in fact, yesterday almost, or the day before. Was doing fine, asymptomatic, remains abstinent from alcohol, and doing well. He did not develop any endocrine or exocrine insufficiency right now, but that's something to watch out for as we manage these patients in outpatient setting. So again, I'm not going to go into the details of everything. Yogesh and Dr. Bhandarkar have very nicely outlined the principles, and I think it's very evident the approach that we have in 2020 for these patients. So just sharing with you the experience at Midas. This was 4 months. Now we have about 20 plus patients. This data was compiled a couple of months ago. Mean age was 49, mostly male. We had a 7.3 weeks duration of pancreatitis before we intervened. The size of the collection on average was about 10 centimeters. We used 2 plastic stents, but 12 lumen opposing stent and 1 hot Axios, which is a cautery enhanced stent. So basically 13 metal stents and 2 plastic stents. And now it's about 18 or 20 metal stents now. One patient needed 4 sessions of necrosectomy. In this case, there's another one actually who needed 1 session. Hospitalization was quite short, I'd say, just 5 days on an average. There was one patient who had a block from necrotic debris and then ended up going for laparoscopic necrosectomy because this patient anyways needed laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So we figured that, we might as well save the trouble and just send a patient for surgery. One patient died with post-procedure sepsis and actually ended up going to surgery. Unfortunately, even despite that, the patient died. And one died from unrelated to procedure, which was a CT scan and then had aspiration, which led to death. Anyway, so open necrosectomy, I'm not going to get into the details. As Yogesh outlined, there's risk of fistulas and higher mortality rate. Again, Panther trial, superiority of minimally invasive approach. Again, various options have been outlined earlier. At Midas, we use a multidisciplinary approach as we do in most tertiary centers in the West. Again, at Midas, it's a combination of radiology, surgery, gastroenterology. We put our heads together and decide what's the best approach for the patient. Yogesh has outlined the initial studies with video-assisted retroperitoneal necrosectomy versus endoscopic necrosectomy. Again, this was a very small pilot trial. Of course, 80% was largely because of considering inflammatory markers as one of the complication, but there was a superiority demonstrated with endoscopic approach, which was again demonstrated in the study which Yogesh showed, with no difference in major complications or death, but risk of fistula was lower with endoscopic approach. Again, moving forward, hospitalization days was lower in the endoscopic approach. So these authors did suggest that there will be a shift towards endoscopic treatment due to results of the study. The more recent randomized controlled trial by Shyam Varadarajalu and group, where endoscopy versus surgery was attempted, used for management. For endoscopy, again, this was in the pre-metal stent era where they used plastic stents. We have since then moved to a lot of use of metal stents, where they used a single gate technique, which is one axis, two plastic stents, small caliber, or for larger collection, they use multi-gate technique, which is more than one axis points, maybe 3 or 4 double pigtail plastic stents. Surgical arm had laparoscopic approach or wide, depending on the location of the collection. Bottom line, if you see, the primary endpoint was lesser in the endoscopic arm, 11% versus 40% in the surgery arm. Mortality was not different. Procedure duration was short. SIRS was less. Length of hospital stay was less. And re-interventions were sort of similar between the groups. Now, the better results in this arm, one could say, were probably because they use metal stents in almost half of their patients now. And with metal versus plastic stents, when we look at endoscopy, we did a study at Mayo while I was there as a fellow, looking at large caliber metal stents, which on the top right is the Axio stent. These are the dumbbell-shaped lumen opposing stents versus plastic stents for drainage. What we found was the resolution rates were actually slightly greater in the metal arm. Requirement for necrosectomy was more in the plastic arm because you were not able to drain the necrotic debris. But again, as you see, in the metal arm, almost 60% did not require any necrosectomy. And I would argue that this was also at Mayo where they were had a lower threshold to perform necrosectomy. So perhaps it's lower as outlined in some of the other studies. The hospital days were lower in the metal stent arm. Number of sessions required were lower in the metal stent arm, and additional radiological or surgery requirement was also lower in the metal stent arm. As far as safety goes, the various studies performed with metal stents. Bleeding rate anywhere from 0 to 7%. In our study, it was 5%. Perforation quite low. One was a wire-guided perforation in our study, only 1.7%, 3%. Stent migration, which occurs as you're doing necrosectomy. So 20% in our study, which is mostly because the endoscope was going back and forth between the gastric lumen into the collection. But other studies, it was much lower. And stent occlusion rates were less than 5%. So by and large, it's a fairly safe procedure. Now, as far as a combination of endoscopic and percutaneous drainage goes, in our patient, it was needed because the patient had extension in the paracolic gutters, and that's really when we look at percutaneous drainage as a benefit in addition. So in this 104 patient series, percutaneous was combined with endoscopy, with plastic stents. It's an old study from 2010 from Virginia Mason Group. None of them developed pancreatocutaneous fistula, which is a little unusual as most patients seem to develop those, and none required surgery. This is another study combining the approaches. Now, this is again the plastic stent era, where initially the authors look at wall of necrosis with less than 12 centimeters in size. Their conventional approach was only to place 2 plastic stents and a nasocystic drain. What they decided to do was this algorithmic approach, where when the size was less than 12, they placed 2 plastic stents and nasocystic catheter. If there was no suboptimal response, they went ahead with placement of additional transgastric plastic catheters. And then again, if there was suboptimal response, they would get endoscopic necrosectomy, and then again suboptimal response, then surgery. If there were extension in paracolic gutters, they got multi-luminal technique, which is what they're saying, with multiple access points, with a 24 French percutaneous catheter, and then again, going forward, doing necrosectomy sessions. They had a 91% success rate versus 60% with a conventional approach of only having 2 plastic stents. All in all, bottom line, if you need more access points, you need to get that. If you have extension in paracolic gutters, transgastric drainage is likely not going to be sufficient, especially if you have a lot of necrotic debris. And it's just wiser and better to early intervene and get a percutaneous access point. Again, nothing different. Again, this is a combination of the approaches depending on the anatomy. Only 7% patient died and 93% they could successfully treat. Only three patients out of 109, actually 83, ended up requiring surgical necrosectomy. So as I move towards my last slide, this is a most recent review from the American Gastroenterology Association based on all the evidence. If you have a walled-off pancreatic necrosis and a large central component, then your preferred approach now, if technical expertise is available, EUS guided placement of a lumen opposing metal stent. If you have large paracolic gutter extension, go ahead and get a percutaneous drainage. Now, if you have large amount of solid debris, and as was in this case, you want to do direct endoscopic necrosectomy until resolution. Now, this is the algorithm which is recommended, which is what we followed in our case successfully and managed this patient effectively. So, well, I will not get into this, but well, that's my last slide. Thank you for listening, and over to you, Dr. Mukherjee. Yeah. Is the video on? Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Saurabh, for excellent presentation on EUS guided drainage. I just would like to have a comment that this particular case is a one which we remember because here there were 4 or 5 sittings of necrosectomy were done, and every time spending 1 hour. But I don't want you to go away with this impression that every case requires this. We have done up till now in last 6 months since Saurabh joined 20 patients, but this was the one patient who had had a persistent fever because he had had a large collection going on up to the pelvis, iliac fossa, and then he has a lot of debris which needed removal. So we will come to the discussion. Let us come to the last speaker. So I have this great opportunity to welcome Manoj, who has done retroperitoneal necrosectomy by putting an endoscope. So that was the news in the paper also. So it's a great thing. Percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy, sinus tract endoscopy. Over to you, Manoj. Manoj does not read an introduction. A very skilled endoscopist and attached to SCG, attached to American Oncology Institute, and we have had a very close relation with Manoj. Over to you, Manoj, please.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. First of all, good evening. Thanks for this kind opportunity to be here for this presentation. I will just go through the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy and sinus tract endoscopy after all the talks of the great leaders here. So I will just go through the case which we have done recently, and then we will discuss about the advantages, indications of the procedure. So this was a 35-year gentleman who presented to us in week 3 of moderately severe acute pancreatitis, which was idiopathic. So he presented to us with pancreatic pain and dyspnea. His counts were normal at that time. We placed the ICD for the massive left-sided pleural effusion that was pancreatic in origin. Just after 2 to 3 days, he was starting with fever with chills and rigors. He had leukocytosis with deranged INR, and his blood culture and urine culture were sterile. We started with empirical antibiotics at that time, we started with the carbipenem because he has already received the other groups initially in the earlier 2 weeks. So considering these cultures negative, we decided to go ahead with the CT abdomen, which revealed that there is a large subdiaphragmatic collection on the left side, and along with that, there was a large acute necrotic collection that was replacing the entire pancreas here. So you can see a large acute necrotic collection here, which was pushing the stomach wall also, but there was a large necrotic collection replacing the entire pancreas. So considering the week 3 of the acute pancreatitis, so likely to have the immature wall, the patient was having coagulopathy, his general condition was not stable. There was no response to the conservative management of antibiotics for at least 5 days. And at the same time, there was a left subdiaphragmatic collection which was very large, and it was reducing his respiratory efforts. So we decided to put the percutaneous drainage for this one by the intervention radiologist, and the intervention radiologist put 216 French Malikoff's catheter in the acute necrotic collection, and the 12 French pigtail catheter was placed in the left subdiaphragmatic collection, which was very clear, where the acute necrotic collection was totally pus. The patient improved well over the period of time. After 4 to 5 days, he started improving. He was asymptomatic. He did a fever. His counts came down to normal. And this was a CT just prior to discharge, before we changed his 2 Malikoff's catheter with the simple 28 French drain. So this was the resolution of the left subdiaphragmatic collection here. And this was a residual acute necrotic collection, which was very well drained by this Malikoff's catheter initially, and then we replaced these 2 Malikoffs with a single 28 French drain, and he was discharged with that one. But surprisingly, he again came to us after 7 to 10 days with fever, with chills and rigors. His drain was about 25 to 50 ml per day, and that was very muddy. He has leukocytosis again with mildly deranged angina. His cultures were again sterile. So we decided to go ahead with the CT abdomen, and CT abdomen this time revealed that yes, there is a residual walled up pancreatic necrotic collection now with a drain in situ. This was a 28 French drain that was placed, and there is a residual collection here. So even after continuing for antibiotics again, he has persistent fever with leukocytosis. So the options that were left for us were to go ahead with to do the retroperitoneoscopy and to do the endoscopic necrosectomy. So the 2 options were there, either to do a vault or to the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy. So I decided to go ahead with the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy for this patient. For the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy, what you require is a flexible gastroscope, which we routinely use in our practice, with 2.8 mm channel and auxiliary water jet function to irrigate the cavity well with a normal saline. Now, all the procedures, therapeutic procedures in GI are carried out with the CO2 insufflation. You need a good irrigation pump for the normal saline irrigation through the cavity. And already the Saurav has discussed about the endoscopic accessories which were used. We need a hemostatic forceps also, for if there is a bleeding, then we can use it. The beauty of this procedure is that this procedure can be easily carried out under sedation. So if the patient is critically ill, then these patients can be carried out bedside. These procedures can be carried out bedside very well. So these are how the steps of the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy are. The intervention radiologist place a drain in the acute necrotic collection or the walled up pancreatic necrotic collection. You allow this percutaneous tract to get mature, which takes at least 10 to 12 days. After maturation of the tract, you dilate the tract up to 30 French, because the average diameter of the scope or the endoscope is about 9 mm. So if you want to enter into the cavity, you have to dilate tract up to 27 to 30 French. So after dilatation of the tract, you pass the endoscope into necrotic cavity, remove the necrotic debris, do the necrosectomy, and then again put a drain for the irrigation of the cavity. Or secondly, if you need another session of necrosectomy if needed, then you can go ahead with the necrosectomy as such. So this was how we did our necrosectomy. So the earlier placed drain was removed over the guide wire, and the guide wire was placed under fluoroscopic guidance, and the tract was dilated with the 12 mm CRE, and the endoscope was passed after that. You can see that there is a lot of necrotic debris here and the pus flex here. We irrigated the cavity well with the normal saline with the irrigation pump, because that is the important thing in while doing the necrosectomy. And this is how the the Rothnet was used for doing the necrosectomy. The important thing while doing the necrosectomy, as discussed, is you have to be a very gentle traction. You have to apply a very gentle traction while pulling out the debris from the wall. If you are too harsh for pulling the debris from the necrotic wall, then they are going to cause a trouble for you, either the perforation of the wall, or secondly, they are going to cause a lot of bleeding for you. So this is how the right tooth was used by us. You can use Rothnet, rat tools, snares, stone extraction baskets, and many accessories like that. And this is after removal of almost entire debris. You can see a good cavity with a minimal oozing from all over the surface, suggestive of a good necrotic debridement by you. And then subsequently, this guide wire was placed into the cavity under endoscopic as well as fluoroscopic guidance to place another drain of 32 French this time. We placed a larger bore drain this time because we wanted, if he needed another session of necrosectomy, then we don't need to dilate the tract. And this was all the necrotic material that was removed after doing the necrosectomy. The post-procedure recovery was uneventful. Patient was discharged on the post-op day 5th with a drain of 32 French. And this is a CT scan abdomen after 2 weeks. You can see that there is a complete resolution of the wall of pancreatic necrotic cavity with a drain in place. So this is how the patient, after subsequent removal of the drain, there is just a small scar here in the left lumbar region of the previous percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy. So the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy, which has been a retroperitoneal approach, we have already discussed about this one. If the patient has infected acute necrotic collection where the wall is not mature, then you need a percutaneous drainage, because the transluminal drainage may not be that much helpful, or they are being associated with the complications. So you have to do a percutaneous drainage in such situations. And if infection persists or sepsis persists even after 4 weeks, when the wall is all matured, then you can go ahead with the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy. And if it already been 4 weeks, you have got infected wall of pancreatic necrosis, if the transluminal drainage is not possible, then you can put a percutaneous drain in these patients, allow the tract to mature, and then you can go ahead with the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy in such situations. The advantages of the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy is it can be used in a critically ill patients where the lab access is not possible. So if the patient is very critically ill, if it's bedside, then you can go ahead with these procedures. And another beauty of this procedure is these procedures can be easily carried out under sedation, where unlike when all the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy, whatever the Saurabh and Bhandarkar sir has done, they need a general anesthesia, and general anesthesia are supposed to provoke the systemic inflammation. And in such critically ill patients, this may be sometimes hazardous for these patients. The another one important thing is there is a subsequent liquefied necrosis drained by the gravity in such patients by this the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy. Because if the patient is critically ill, if he is bedridden, the transluminal approach may not drain the cavity. The dependent portion may not get the pus flex or liquefied necrosis may not get drained properly in such scenario. So you need to have the percutaneous drainage for such patients. The another important advantages is there is no intraperitoneal transmission. There is lesser bleeding risk with the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy, and you have got a flexible scope which can go ahead or access deeper into the abdominal cavity very well, and you can do a necrosectomy. The main disadvantages are they are more invasive compared to other endoscopic techniques, and there is a need of repeated procedures for the effective drainage as such. So this is a large study which was recently published by the AIIMS group which has shown that the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy carries a good success rates as well as good clinical outcomes in the management of infected pancreatic necrosis. So as we already discussed, it's a teamwork, and the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy plays a very important role in management of infected pancreatic necrosis. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoj. Dr. Yogesh?
Yes, sir. We
Am
will
I-
take question answers. Yeah,
yes,
we are.
I am seen on the screen or not?
No, sir. I guess you are from your mobile, so I can't see you, but we can listen to you very loud and clear.
Okay.
So I think go ahead with question answers because it's already 9:15. If you have any,
we can directly go to the question answers, certainly.
yeah, because then everyone can answer those. There might be many questions today. All are
Yes.
surgeons and all are looking at endoscopes, so they might have many questions. So yeah, questions are invited. Anyone having questions, please raise your hand. I have a first question from Dr. Rajesh Singhvi, sir. I guess he is online. Rajesh sir, please unmute your mic. Okay. He has put his question to Saurabh. How long the cystogastrostomy remains patent after removal of LAMS? Saurabh, yeah.
Hi, thank you, Yogesh. Sorry, if I understand correctly, after removal of LAMPS, how long does it remain patent?
Yeah, that
I think looking at, never end up sort of following up and evaluating them to see how it closes. But from my experience, they do seem to close quite fast because gastric wall is thick, and sometimes you have to go back if you hear cases where stents have migrated inside the cavity. It can be quite difficult actually to find the hole because they just seem to just close really fast. There's no, I don't know if there's any evidence to tell you exactly how long does it take because no one looks at it. The patient's doing fine, you take it out and it's done. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Yogesh, I missed you. Maybe it's my internet.
Yeah, Dr. Vikram Desai, sir, please unmute yourself.
Oh, Yogesh, did you say something? I missed your comment.
Yeah, no. I just asked Vikram Desai, sir, to unmute his mic because he has raised his hand. Vikram, sir.
Okay.
Vikram, sir, please unmute yourself. I guess he's not online. We don't have any other hand being raised. I don't know why.
Yogesh, regarding the previous question, if I'm right, when you do a surgical cystogastrostomy, you take sutures, right, to maintain the stoma.
Yes,
so
yes,
here
sir.
we are not taking any sutures, so that's why the stoma collapses quite fast.
No, sir. Even our sutures, if you look at even our sutures, the suture is not to make anastomosis like we do for bowel anastomosis. These sutures are hemostatic sutures because the wall of cyst and wall of stomach are highly vascular wall. Okay, so whatever the opening we make, the opening is actually just to control the bleeding at that site. We take Prolene sutures in a running fashion. It's not a proper anastomosis which we want. Of course, it's a cystogastrostomy we talk of, but eventually as the cavity collapses, you won't find anything there on that posterior wall, like after 4 to 6 weeks or 8 weeks.
How do you keep the stoma open? Like in endoscopy, we are using lamps of multiple plastic stents. So how does a surgical stoma remain?
We do a 3 to 4 centimeter circular stoma. We cut 3 to 4 centimeter wall of stomach completely. That makes a big hole in the posterior wall of stomach. That keeps it open for 2 to 3 weeks till that necrosis.
Not the sutures. Just the sheer size which is so big.
The aim of suture is to control the bleed rather than keeping it open. Yeah. So we have Ashok Gajbia, sir. Ashok Gajbia, sir, please unmute yourself. Ashok Gajbia, sir, you can ask your question. No, we don't have him online also. So I guess the session is open for discussion. Mukivar sir, you can take questions or anything if you want, sir. Or,
No, there
yeah,
are few things which I would like to comment, because as Dr. Prashant has said, that endoscopic ultrasound may not be available at all the places. So there are few comments like that, how many of the patients presenting as WOPN will present with bulge which can be tackled endoscopically? Anybody can answer that question, because that would sort of find out that how many of the percentage of patients with acute WOPN can be treated directly by endoscopy and how safe it is.
So I have not come across a particular literature or data which shows how many have bulge and how many don't. But going by a subjective feeling, I would say almost 60 to 65% will have a bulge and 30 to 40% may not have a bulge.
Okay.
What do you say, Saurabh? What is your experience?
Yeah, so if there's no head-to-head comparison data on this, and that's sort of evident in the most recent reviews, that's all they talk about. The thing is, it's just that availability. I mean, once you have endosonography available and you can ensure there are no blood vessels, so at least in theory, you feel like you're not
So the modern
traversing a blood
literature
vessel.
and the standard of care is all about
Everybody's been to experience.
whether there is
It's
bulge
okay.
or no bulge, you have to use endosono. That is the recommendation.
Yeah, so it doesn't matter. The bulge is not, we don't care really. Yeah.
But that 1 centimeter distance within the wall of stomach or duodenum is important. More than that, I think it would be difficult. What do you say?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that, please?
The distance between the gut wall and this collection should be within 1 centimeter, even if it is
True.
endosono.
Yeah, so you going back to why it should be 1 centimeter. Largely, it's because the hot axial stent, the length is what is, if I'm not mistaken, I think it's 1.5 centimeters or 1 or 1.5. So that's why if you are having a collection which is say 3 centimeters away, technically you're not able to traverse it effectively and place the metal stent. Now, the second issue is on scans. Sometimes when you go inside, it's different from what you see in the scan. So in scan, sometimes it may be a little away, but when you are actually seeing it on endosonography, it can actually be nearer than what's in the scan. So I don't really rely on the scan too much. I mean, of course, unless it's like absolutely away in retroperitoneum, then, deep down in pelvis, then it's a different story. But for the most part, we do rely on our ability when we are doing endosonography to see how close it is. So yeah.
So we have
Please.
a question from. Sir, we
Hello.
have a question. Yeah, Dr. Vikas Jain.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, Dr.
Hello.
Vikas, please ask your question. Yeah.
Nice discussion by all the panelists, sir. I have one simple question. What are the complications of fistula formation in world of pancreatic necrosis? If you are doing endoscopically, the complication will be rare, but the most appealing to our general surgeon is what the procedure described by Vyavare sir, in which retroperitoneal we pass the radiologist pass the drain pictal catheter followed by endoscopy after 2 weeks. So in such case, what are the complications? What are the complications of fistula formation?
Sir, in any surgical necrosectomy, if you do transperitoneal like open technique or retroperitoneal lavage or debridement, the fistula formation rate is nearly 25 to 30%. Surgical necrosectomy. When you are draining it out, everything through a drain, through retroperitoneum, or if you are doing open necrosectomy and debriding everything. The other thing which might be more important in developing fistula is extent of necrosis in pancreas and peripancreas, exactly in the lesser sac. If it is completely necrosed and you have debrided everything surgically with a very good aggression, the chances of fistula formation will be far higher. If it is exclusively a paracolic gutter collection, there is no much necrosum in the lesser sac, it's only a fluid, then the chances of developing fistula will be bit less. Manoj sir,
and what are the
Yeah, I agree with
Yogesh.
that one. The percutaneous necrosectomy is likely to have the 25 to 30% of pancreatic cutaneous fistula charges. So that is like that.
Okay.
With the endoscopy, the other transluminal do not have because they get drained into the lumen. So they don't
Drain
have
to the
power.
lumen.
Yeah.
And also
Manoj,
the
one
other
way
issue
to reduce the fistula rate is use the progressively reducing diameters of the drainage catheters.
Yeah, I agree.
So
Okay.
after 32, you come down to say 28, and then you gradually keep on reducing the size of catheter. That is
Well, the
supposed to
bigger problem, the bigger
Sir,
problem
and
which
Yeah.
we face by
what is the follow-up of that patient, sir? How is the patient now? Means, is there fistula, and how is the progress after necrosectomy?
So I have shown you the slides also. It is fully closed. There is no pancreatic cutaneous fistula for this patient. And on follow-up, because of lockdown, he could not come, but telephonically he is fine, doing well. There is no further
Okay.
episodes of pancreatitis also, and there is no pain also.
Sir, Prashant
The
sir,
other question
about
is, how does it matter if it's a long duration, large track that you have created versus a small track for a shorter duration? I think
Okay.
it's a good idea to certainly go down the size of your access point. But say if you have it in place for like 8 weeks, and you keep doing this, then you may end up having a chance of having fistulas more. Is my impression.
with decreasing the size of
Thank you, sir.
I'll tell about Vikas sir. Yeah,
Yes,
go
sir.
ahead, sir. Yeah, Vikas sir, please.
Ji. Thank you to all the panelists, sir. Very nice discussion in the forum. Ji. Thank you, sir.
Other problem with decreasing the size of drains which we as a surgeon faces, if you decrease from 32 to 28, the patient will have peri-drain leak. The patient
Leak.
will say that is getting wet again and again. So if we have peri-drain leak, we in fact increase the size of drain so that there is no peri-drain leak. So by decreasing successively, we may have peri-drain leak. Then we may have to apply a stoma bag and all those things to prevent skin excoriation. That is one thing we face when we do surgical necrosectomies. That patients start peri-drain leakage after like 10 to 12 days. We have next question from Dr. Dhananjay Kane sir. Please unmute yourself, sir. Kane sir.
Yeah, there are two questions. One is for Manoj for this last case regarding pain. Instead of pain, can we not use a cystoscope which gives a wider lumen, continuous irrigation, plus you can take out debris in a large quantity? And same principle we can apply probably to the case shown by Saurabh. Hats off to his papers. But then when he went in for a fourth session of endoscopic necrosectomy, is it not better to do using a percutaneous tract and a cystoscope, do a direct necrosectomy?
Yes, sir. I'll answer that Saurabh's question. Let Manoj sir answer it because
Sir,
I was involved in surgical. Yeah.
I agree with you. The options what were there for us after doing the percutaneous drainage was to do the heart or versus the percutaneous endoscopic necrosectomy. So the patient was there. The cystoscope, yes, but it's a rigid one. You cannot go everywhere into the cavity itself. Yes, the problems with the endoscopic accessories are there very small. You remove very small quantity of the necrotic material with that one. So the problem with the endoscopic necrosectomy, you remove small amount, you have to go frequently. The cystoscope has some advantages, but at the same time, cystoscope is rigid one, it cannot go throughout the cavity very well.
No, but the cavity you showed was quite large to accommodate a cystoscope, I believe.
Yeah, great, sir. Agreed.
Thank you.
I think
Yeah,
I can just sort of second Dr. Vivare's comment there. I've done it 2-3 times where we, not in India, but out in West, where we use metal covered esophageal stents for percutaneous access. But this is good that you can actually do it without metal stents, which in India, obviously, it's a cost issue. When I did the percutaneous necrosectomies, I think when you realize when you're inside, there are a lot of recesses and pockets in different directions. So when you use a rigid scope, you may not exactly reach the location effectively. And the issue is with the flexible endoscope, the advantage is that you can, maneuver it very well and actually gain access to some deeper pockets. Of course, as Dr. Vivare pointed out, the channels are small and accessories are small, and that's a downside. But that's the reason But if I've seen VART before, and that seems to be the issue. You have stiff instruments. So it's straight shot, great. But as soon as you're turning left and right, now it's a problem, basically. And
Dhananjay sir, in the
Yogesh, you can answer the
Yeah,
the time Saurabh had to go, it was because of me, because I was not persistent on going in for surgery. As Saurabh said, if we go through retroperitoneal approach by using our nephroscope or a laparoscope, the majority of collection which was causing the fever was on right side towards the head, just below the hepatic flexure. If you look at the CT, till the last necrosectomy which Saurabh did, it was predominantly on the right side, just below the hepatic flexure of colon. We were not getting any percutaneous access through that side, and going from this percutaneous catheter drain which we had placed in left flank to the right side towards the hepatic flexure was practically difficult. He would have required a laparoscopic necrosectomy in which I would have to open up the mesocolon and then remove it, or probably an open necrosectomy for that small necrosome which was remaining. That's why I was a bit reluctant to go in surgically, because of that small amount of necrosome which was causing trouble. And that's why I persisted Saurabh to go ahead with endoscope again and again and do it. Practically going on right side through a left paracolic incision or that drain is far difficult to reach the head where there was a necrotic cavity. That's why we didn't go ahead with surgical
that I understand. That's perfectly all right. But the
Yeah.
collection in the left iliac fossa going down in the almost inguinal region, that was a huge cavity. That
Yeah,
could
it
have been
drained
easy.
Yeah, but you
came out
see, if
through
you look
our
at our endoscopy, I think the bottom line is what's easier and how you can gain access to it and remove it. So if you see our access, the reason we placed the drain was because endoscopy could not reach there. But basically, combination of endoscopy and the percutaneous drain, we could really clear the left paracolic region. We didn't have to go percutaneously with an endoscope, because from transgastric it was easy access. As
go
Yogesh
towards
pointed out, yeah, I mean, putting another drain on the right side would have been more harmful, because again, either going laparoscopically for him to open up, or for a radiologist to, I don't know, find the way across, would have been more detrimental. So that's why we stuck to endoscopy, and we managed to get it out. But of course, Yogesh would have had to come to rescue had we not been able to do it.
Oh, I was not ready. So Ashok sir, we have a question from Dr. Ashok Gajbia sir. I have unmuted you now.
Yogesh, hello.
Yes sir.
Good evening, Yogesh.
Sir, please go
Hello?
ahead with your question. Yes sir.
No. I am asking you a question.
Yes sir.
Why you are not bothered about me? When
Sir, that
I raise my hand, you are not asking me the question. You are not giving me chance to ask the question.
Sir, that is not the question, sir. I have unmuted you earlier also. You can ask the panelist. I already took your name. I guess you are not getting unmuted by your side.
Okay.
I had already taken your name. I have already taken your name.
Okay, Yogesh.
Yeah.
Please give mic to the presenter.
Yes, sir. We all are online, sir. We are all listening to you. Everyone is unmuted. You can ask.
My question is different.
Yeah.
Okay. I am not concerned about the pancreatitis or acute pancreatitis or chronic pancreatitis. I am concerned about the rate and diabetes mellitus.
Okay. So after necrosectomy, how many patients develop diabetes? Is that the thing you want to know, sir?
Yeah, that is my question.
Okay. So Prashant sir, your experience about diabetes in post necrosectomy or post necrotizing pancreatitis?
No, I have not found after necrosectomy in the setting of acute pancreatitis, I have not found diabetes mellitus. It's more common if the patient has underlying chronic pancreatitis, and then that causes both exocrine and endocrine insufficiency.
Hello?
Yeah, it's.
Sir?
I can just take a comment.
Sir, do you
It's
have
very
any
less.
option to prevent the diabetes, or you can treat the diabetes with? We are the surgeon. Hello?
Yes,
We
sir.
are the
Please.
surgeon. have you done any study regarding the treatment of the diabetes in Indian scenario?
I can just make a comment on diabetes. See, I think the issue is if you follow them long enough, at least if you look at the data, 20 to 24% develop endocrine insufficiency. Now that is obviously because your pancreas is necrosed and
Have you
destroyed.
anyhow tried
That's why
about the beta cell transplantation in the pancreas?
No, sir, it is done only in like auto islet cell transplant has to be done. If total pancreatectomy is done, then only it can be done. In a necrotizing pancreatitis, no role of beta cell transplant or anything like that.
No, I'm not concerned about this necrotizing pancreatitis. I'm more concerned about how to treat the diabetes mellitus in Indian scenario.
Sir, we don't have islet cell
We are the
transplant.
surgeon.
Yeah, we don't have that treatment as of now available
Yeah.
with us.
Can I make a
So
comment?
why we are not going to research on that particular topic?
See, can I make a comment?
Yes, sir. Mukhewar, sir, please.
Okay.
Dr. Gajbhai, managing diabetes
Yes, sir.
would be a separate topic. See, basically, as has been answered, that the incidence of diabetes is not that common after pancreatic necrosis, and
sir.
the incidence of diabetes is more with surgical necrosectomy as compared to endoscopic necrosectomy.
Exactly.
Managing diabetes after the necrosectomy would be similar to managing diabetes as the other diabetes. So there
Yes,
is
sir.
no separate, there is no role of islet cell transplant.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yogesh, should we wind up the session?
Sir, this last question which Dr. Sagar Patil has placed here, I'll just ask him to unmute and then we'll wind up the session. Sagar, your question. He has asked a question and he has put a question here. So what are the scenario you think patient should go for surgical necrosectomy over endoscopic necrosectomy? Sagar has asked. Sagar, can you unmute yourself?
Anyway, you can answer that question, Yogesh.
Yeah, Sagar is here. So Sagar, I have put on screen some.
You can answer, Yogesh.
This is the CT picture in which I feel the patient should go for surgical necrosectomy directly because it's not in communication with stomach. Here, as you can see, there is a fluid collection of around 1 to 1.5 centimeter in between the WPN and fluid, and there is no track on which you can get a percutaneous access to these patients. So these are the gas-filled WPN in which I would prefer a surgical necrosectomy directly. Sometimes we may have cavity like these. So here again there is no communication with stomach. As you can see on screen, there is no communication with stomach, but then I have a direct access through this point where we can put a percutaneous drain. After putting a drain, if patient is not improving through that drain only, I'll go for surgical necrosectomy rather than an endoscopic one. So it depends on the location of the WPN, its approximation with stomach and all other factors. That is my answer. Sagar, I hope you are convinced.
Any other questions, Yogesh?
No, sir, no. We don't have any other questions.
Can I make a final comment
Yes,
before we
yes.
disperse?
Please, sir.
See, I think in clinical scenario, if the patient, you drain the cyst or the WPN, and if the patient is having persistent fever, that is a sign that the necrotic material is there, which is responsible for this fever, and you have to go ahead and do what is direct endoscopic necrosectomy. And in people, those who are putting a plastic stent versus metal stent, what we have observed earlier, prior to Saurabh, we used to use plastic stent, but the resolution of the cyst and especially WPN was taking long time, and it was the patient had to stay in the hospital for a long time. But with the lumen opposing stent, it has been seen that the hospital stay is less, the interventions required is less. there is a German trial which has said that average endoscopic necrosectomy sessions required are 5 to 6. But with the metal stent, the sessions required is only 2, average 2 or 3 sessions. And over the plastic stent, the self-expanding metal stent, long stents are better. And now with the introduction of lumen opposing stent, they are better stent as far as the necrosectomy and the resolution of pseudocyst is concerned. I was reading one article comparing the metal stent, plastic stent versus lumen opposing stent. The lumen opposing stent is given probably the prior the weightage over the other stent. So if the patient can afford, we should do the lumen opposing stent. I wanted to ask about dissolving agents which are there, because I read one thing that giving an acid suppressant which is commonly used in these cases, we should avoid that acid suppressant, because acid causes dissolution of necrosis and requires less sitting. So giving antacids or H2 blockers or PPI should be avoided, because it helps in lysis of necrotic material. Whatever I read about the dissolving agent for necrosis, I think two things are required. We don't have head-to-head trial or good data about dissolving agents, but we need to have a good accessories to remove, because it's a painstaking job removing the necrotic material, which average session takes about 1 hour or so, with the patient in sedation, of course. So I feel that this is a very, very promising technique which can avoid the surgical intervention. And in majority of the patients, they are discharged within couple of days. But some people having persistent fever with large amount of necrosis would require necrosectomy. I am thankful to Dr. Yogesh Bang and the ASN for giving me this opportunity. And I'm also thankful to all the panelists, Dr. Prashant, Dr. Manoj, and Dr. Saurabh, for elucidating talk. And it was covering the topic entirely nicely. Thankful to you all.
Sir, like last, just one point which I wanted to point out from surgeon's point of view is that what we see as a surgeon, endoscopic, laparoscopic, or whatever necrosectomies we do, I don't know whether you will agree with me or not. Most of our patients are from ICU, who are still on sepsis, sometimes on inotropes. They are not patients who are taken on OT table from ward, because these are the patients who are undergoing some step-up approach through endoscope or percutaneous drain. It's not getting resolved, and then we have to take them for OT. So these are the patients who are from ICU, already under compromised situation. So naturally, the end result of surgery in these type of patients who have already underwent all these procedures is not that good. And comparison always occurs between these two groups, where the surgeon is taking up for surgery after all these procedures, and then endoscopic procedure is being done on a patient who is from ward. So naturally, the difference between organ failure, mortality also comes up because of that. But then it's okay. We have to improve our results in any way, by doing percutaneous way or endoscopic way, whichever way. The other reason why surgeons still have that hitch against endoscopic or this step-up approach is we are not built up to have patience. Our training is not to have a patience in which we can just wait and see, remove it a little bit, and then again after 72 hours see, and all those things. What surgeons do is they go in, they remove everything in a single go, and then just give a wash. That is what we have been trained up. So getting from that aspect to an aspect in which we have to wait and watch, see after 72 hours, it will take some time for us to get into this. So probably that's why
Yogesh, I don't underplay the importance of open necrosectomy. Open necrosectomy has its place. So I don't deny the importance of open necrosectomy. It definitely has its place. As we have analyzed our data in MIDAS, out of 30 necrosectomy done in last 6 months, as you have said, 8 were the open or laparoscopic necrosectomy, and 22 were the endoscopic procedures. So
Yes.
preference has to be given to the step-up approach wherever possible.
Least invasive or step-up approach, sir. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. That is
Yeah.
what the control trials tell us, not just very sick patients who go for surgery versus very fit patients going for endoscopy. No, that should not be the message. The control trials, randomized trials, they say that the step-up approach, where minimally invasive approach first, and then going for the more invasive approach. That should be the
Yes,
message. So I thank
Yes,
Yogesh very much, and thank VSA and ASN for this wonderful opportunity of this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Manoj sir. Thank you,
Thank you,
Prashant
Yogesh.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mukevar sir.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Hope to see you on Friday for our surgical session, sir.
Yeah.
Surgical. You may excuse me on Friday because I don't understand surgery.
No issue.
We'll see tomorrow.
Yeah.
Do you stop the
Okay.
broadcast?
Yeah. I'll exit. I'll end, sir. I'll end.